Welcome to A Well-Designed Business. My name is Luann Nigara, and I'm so glad you found this podcast. Together with my husband Vince and our partner Bill, we have grown our company WindowWorks from the ground up. So I know and I understand the challenges you face in running your interior design business. I also know that your talent alone isn't enough to ensure your success. So on this podcast, we talk about strategies and practical steps to help you grow your business. But make no mistake about it, we have our share of fun here too, mixed in with those aha moments that I love so much. This isn't fluff. Nobody has time for that. Whether you are a new interior designer or a seasoned designer, I am here to help you create and to manage the kind of interior design firm that you dream of. It's straight talk and it's action. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, welcome to another episode of A Well-Designed Business. It's Power Talk Friday. Today is a fantastic show, getting very deep into understanding why when you set financial goals for yourself, for your personal earnings, you have to back it all the way up to your billable hours and your hourly rate. But when you do this, it's freeing, it's empowering, and it's energizing to have this information and to be able to understand it and to be able to set your goals by it. So who is bringing all this fabulousness to the show today? It is Kimberly Merlitti, the owner of KMM Consulting. And Kimberly takes clients from around the United States. She has 20 years of experience working in accounting for companies such as Swinerton Builders, WRNS Studio, and Martin Group. She has her master's in accounting from Golden Gate University, and she also has a very diverse group of service-based companies that she services. But it's a main focus of hers, the small interior design, construction, and architectural firms. The goal of Kim's firm is to make the businesses that she works for as profitable as they can be by educating them on accounting, cash flow management, tax deductions, project reporting, and business management. I am really delighted to introduce you to her today. I think you're going to get a lot out of this show. Hi, Kim. Thanks so much for joining me on A Well-Designed Business today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Kim, you are an interesting little enigma of a business there.
Yeah.
So I love it because many times designers have said to me that they're like, how do I get a Vinny in my business? Because in my business, my husband is the person that is the one that makes the financials make sense to me, helps me to understand them. He's the one that has all the conversations with our CPA and Adriana, who functions as our bookkeeper. And a lot of times they say, where do I get this? And your company, your consulting company, is built all around the premise that you are acting as the CFO or guiding as the way the CFO would guide the principal. I guess that's not acting as, but taking almost a role of teaching an interior designer how and what is important financially in their business and how to understand it, and then how to do the rest of their work in relation to it. Am I right?
Yeah, and I come into these interior design businesses and they all look at me like the accounting and the finance scares me. And I say to them, I go, well, you're in the business of interior design, but now you're an entrepreneur. You're not just an interior designer. So you have to do things like finance, HR, marketing, advertising, and still be an interior designer. Right. And I come into companies to people that don't know how to read financial statements, or those that are really good and just need that little extra push or guidance on how to understand how to run their business. But I do have a specialty of what I call project revenue accounting. I kind of made that up on my own, but all the interior designers and basically general contractors and architects out there know exactly what I'm talking about. Their revenue comes in on a project by project basis.
Right. And the thing about it is this is a tough part of the interior design business model of not ever really knowing when the next client is going to call, or if, you've got 3 or 4 proposals out there, will 1 accept it and get moving? Will 3 accept it and get moving? And so when you talk about project revenue accounting, right? So that's, well, that's projecting. That's not accounting. So accounting, when you say project revenue accounting, you're talking about a project that's in process and how to manage the revenue. For instance, somebody gets a $50,000 check and they can't just stick it in the checkbook and then go out to Tahiti. They've got to, account for that revenue and make sure that they have all of those monies when they need them for all the different parts of the project that are going to be ongoing. Am I on the right track?
You are, and it's actually based off, accounting isn't a concept that says it means actual numbers. Your numbers are in place, the numbers. Projection is more where I bring in the finance part of what I do. And I started at Swinerton Builders like 15 years ago, learning from project managers in the field how to track revenue on a contract by contract basis. Well, here's the difference between general contracting and interior design that I learned of the hard way. General contracting, you have a contract and you have a schedule, and you also have a budget. When I came into residential design and I come in and ask, do you have a budget for this client? Do you have a schedule? When do they want installed? I would say 95% of the time the designer would come back and go, I have no idea. So my consulting starts at the very beginning of a project before they even get that client. And I counsel them and I say, here's your onboarding. You need to ask when they want it done, and you need to ask them what their budget is. And some of these designers have never asked their clients these questions. Some have now. I have to give credit to those that have already. But those that are looking me like deer in the headlights when I ask that question, I say, okay, now I know I have my work cut out for me. And I counsel them from the very beginning to the very end. And that goes for projecting when it should be done, what the money the client wants to spend, and communicating with their client on keeping on budget. And obviously, anytime that client changes their mind 2 to 3 to 4 times, it's added scope. Right. And they need to be paid for that. So yeah.
Let me ask you a question. How, if you've had more than one occasion where you've started the process with working with a design firm and you've said to them, what is the budget for this project? And you've had more than one occasion where the designer has not known the answer to that. I almost can't even fathom that. How is that client, how is that designer even signing a contract with that client if the budget hasn't been established? And if you tell me that you run into it, then I know it to be true, okay? And so what that says to me is that not, hey, what's wrong with everybody out there, but how can we help all of those that find themselves in that situation? So when you find yourself there, what is the first thing that you say to the principal in order to help them understand how they have to access the budget, how they have to get the client? Getting the client to establish their budget is probably part of what you do, and I understand you probably have skill in doing it, but I would think your bigger strength here is helping the designer to understand how they should determine what the budget is for what the client asked for.
Right. So when I ask that question and they don't know how to answer it, my next question is, do you have a boilerplate contract? Boilerplate just means a standard contract that you can use with everyone, and then you add the scope per client. And believe it or not, Lan, the question is, no, I don't sometimes. And that's scary, to be honest with you. And usually these are smaller designers that have only been in business 1 to 2, 3 years. Right. And that is a challenge to me. I want to make them profitable. I don't want them to fail. So I love working with those clients that don't know anything. I'm talking to them, they have no idea what I'm talking about a contract. So we sit there and go through a contract and make sure that it has, this is what your scope should be. And by this time, if they have a new client and they haven't gone on a walkthrough, I always say, well, have you been on a walkthrough of the property? Did you ask them what their budget is? And based off those questions, before they even get that client, they should come up with a budget. I've required my clients, my principals, to come up with a budget. And sometimes it's like kicking and screaming to get them to do it. but they do get the job. It makes them look better as opposed to someone they're competing with for the same job. They look like they respect their client's money and time, and I think it makes them look better as opposed to their competition out there.
And when you require them to get a budget, do you mean you ask them to go through all of the steps of having the painter give his scope, the window treatment give their scope, with a tiler give their scope? Do you actually ask them to collect hard numbers based on that project, or do you ask them to evaluate past projects and at least arrive at a working budget that should be reasonable?
I love this question. So I wish we could get a scope from all the vendors. I wish that was the case. And that's actually how I used to do it at Swinerton. But here in my business, when you don't have that information, that's not even possible at this point. And when you try to get that, the client won't be able to answer the question. So what I require them to do is go through what we start is room by room by room in the house or in the commercial space. I also work with interior designers that work in commercial spaces. And I say, how long would it take you based off what the client wants to see in this room? How long would it take you to do design services? Well, then don't forget purchasing time and installation. The number one thing that's missed in a budget is purchasing installation. And as we all know, and I'm sure the designers know this, it could be 1 hour or it could be 20. You cannot forecast how long an installation is going to take you. You can try, but there's unknown factors that it's under no one's control when it comes to that. So then they put a budget together by room, and then I say, okay, now that's your design time. So how do you know that that's going to take you 10 to 20 hours? Here's the different aspect, and this is where I'm going to lead into my number one thing. Do you track your time? Do you have historical records that tells you how long a certain job has taken you? And they'll say, oh, yeah, I have what I've billed my client. And I said, okay, well, all of your time is included in that. I know you're laughing because everyone's like, okay, yeah, I'm so great. I do track my time. I go, okay, so you were able to bill every single hour you spent on this job. And they look at me like, no, I had to cut it back. I go, okay, so where are those hours you cut back? Oh, well, I don't enter those. And so I come back and I say, okay, well, to work with me, I require you to track all your time. And that means if you work 40 hours, I want to see 40 hours of entry. And I always talk to my principals and say, if you are 50% utilized billable in a week, so 50% of that week is billed to your client, what are you doing for the other 50%? And they'll look at me and go, I don't know, I had to take the kids to school, or I had to go to this marketing event. And we all know principals need to be networking and going out to events and doing all that. That's fine. But a lot of them don't know how much time they're spending on non-billable work if they're not tracking it. And you'd be amazed of how much time is not getting billed because they are not tracking every hour of their time.
Well, it's sort of like when I always relate everything to exercise or food. It's sort of like when somebody says, how many calories do you eat a day? Oh, probably 1,500. Really? Start writing everything down. You had 1,500 for lunch, sweetie. You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
You don't realize.
Italian. We don't write down any calories, but I completely understand.
Well, we don't count the ones that stand while we're cooking, that we tasted, and with this and with that. And that is the same thing with a designer's day. So maybe they are actually picking or dropping off children, but maybe they're also having a conversation with a trade for the half hour of that ride. That's, a billable hour, right? A billable half hour, right?
Yep.
Okay.
But it's going to be marked down billable because they can't bill it to the client. So when they start tracking, I have a new client right now I just took on, and she loves tracking her time. And she's like, Kim, I'm so much more productive just doing a month of this. I mean, and she's able over, let's say, a year. I have a client that started tracking her time 2 years ago, and now she knows how long it takes her to do, let's say, a living room with a certain quality of furniture. She just knows now, historically, how long it takes her and her current staff, or the staff back then, to get a project that's similar done. You need to do that so you can bid out new jobs, and you can look like you know what you're talking about when you're sitting down with your clients. And that goes a long way to be that responsible and know you are the expert at interior design. A lot of times my designers will go in and just sit with their clients, and the clients will throw comments back at them. Well, why do I have to pay time and purchasing? And you say, because I'm the expert. You are the interior design expert. you are getting discounts on purchasing because they have a relationship with you. You know how to space plan a room. And forgive me, I don't know all the terminology, but I mean, I learned what a chase lounge was or how long it took to get window coverings up on the wall. I mean, I didn't know any of that. And it takes time and experience to be able to communicate that to your client and go, this is why you hire me as opposed to doing it yourself.
Right.
Because I can make it look beautiful. It's a piece of artwork.
Right.
So,
well, I have to say, we had in episode number 94, Debbie Pinelli was on the show, and she's a designer here in New Jersey. And that I remember very distinctly that was her message. One of the big messages in her episode is that she took the time to meticulously track her hours so that now, after many years of being an interior designer, when she walks into a room, she has a pretty good darn idea how long it's going to take her to execute that room. Of course, there's always variables and personalities and things like that, but she can stand in a space and say, this is an 8-hour, this is a 12-hour, this is a 20-hour, this is a 40-hour. And that is important, and you only really arrive at that when you take the time to meticulously track. So that's one of the first things that you do when you start working with an interior design principal is you ask them to track not only their own hours, but the hours of their staff, if they have staff.
Correct. It's one of the first two questions are you reconciled through the last month? And second, do you track all your time for you and your staff? Because my models that I work with do not work unless they're tracking their time.
Right. And I also am recalling, I don't know which episode, Krista Cooper was on the show. Yeah, you love her.
I know her.
Right?
Yeah, I know her. Yeah.
Yeah, and she was on 3 or 4 times, but there was an episode that she talked about the goal, I guess, for what, like you said, as a principal, she said you're going to be billable X amount of hours, but as the principal, you're also the rainmaker, and you need to be out doing things other than billable. But do you have sort of a bar or I don't know what's something that you encourage your design clients to strive for, like if you have a senior or a junior assistant, the goal for how many hours you think that is what's the darn words I'm trying to find, like a metric for how many hours a junior or a senior should be billable as opposed to the principal. My goodness, Luann.
It's okay. Actually, the number one question is, can I hire? What will they cost me? I made this payroll calculator because when I started in interior design, I got that question all the time, and I couldn't answer it. I mean, I could answer it in my own Excel spreadsheet, but I needed a way to explain it to my principals. And it's called a payroll calculator, and those that are listening know exactly what I'm talking about, the ones that are already working with me. And I do a payroll calculator, and I start with their salary. I add their fully burdened costs. So if you have someone that has a $50,000 salary and you pay their insurance and you do a match and you pay what's called federal unemployment, everybody knows FUTA, and workman's comp is required in some states. You have to look at the state demographics or the state law, first of all. And then that becomes their fully burdened rate. And then I use multipliers to give them a suggested billable. Then I go ahead and I look and I go down, I use that suggested billable, and I say if they're utilized 75% of the week, how much revenue are they going to make you on a monthly or yearly basis? And actually, I use this payroll calculator to come up with budgets. It's the heart of profitability in an interior design firm. I always say that. And then when I speak to large crowds of designers, they'll ask tons of questions. I just spoke at Stark Carpet in DC 2 weeks ago to 13 designers. And you thought that I taught them a new language. It was amazing. I got so many questions. I love it when I get that many questions. And I just basically went through the payroll calculator. That's all I did. Okay. I said, this is how you do it. This is how you understand what they're going to make you. And as you can see, if you have a principal that's 50% utilized, which means half of your week, if you hire a senior designer senior designers honestly should be no lower than 75% utilized, because they are your money maker. So when that is your top amount of revenue coming into the company. So when I go to a small firm and the principal is the only experienced designer, I have a discussion with them and I go through the payroll calculator and I say, you need to hire a senior designer. and you need, unless they just love being a one-person firm, and then we build a model off a one-person firm. I never try to add stress to a designer if they're like, I'm fine with just being one person.
Right.
Okay, so let's show you how to make money as a one person.
Right.
But if they're like, oh, I want to grow and I have 10 projects coming up, I'm like, okay, we need to staff up then.
Right.
And let's go through what we need to hire, and we go through the payroll calculator. And in my Excel spreadsheet, each tab is a different employee. And I do it for every single employee that they want to hire or that they currently have. And to be honest with you, we do, when I start this process with a new company and I show the principal how much money they're not getting from their current staff, they are shocked. They are like, oh my God, I thought that I was making a lot of money off of my staff, and I show their utilizations are below 40. And we take a look at their time entry. If they are tracking time, that's another thing. If they're not tracking the time, we can't find out why they're not being productive. But your staff needs to be productive. They need to hit those utilizations every single month, or you're not going to make the money that you want to make, period. Right. I mean, it's that simple.
So, okay. So yes, that's simple, and no, not that simple, right? So let's pull it apart a little bit.
Yes.
So we are using as a guideline that the principal should be billing at 50% of their hours. We're just saying like guidelines that you are goals. Okay. We're not saying should and, close up your business if you're not doing this, but this is what you try and help and coach people to meet. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you're saying a principal should be billable 50% of the time. A senior designer should be billable 75% of the time. And I just, for clarity's sake, are we making a distinction between a senior designer and a junior designer? Or are we just talking in simply whatever you want to call the designer that's not the principal? Like if you're a three-man firm, you're a principal, another designer, and say an admin. So that we don't care. I'm being really ridiculous, right? Call her junior, call her senior. That's what she is. She's the next one in line, right?
Well, actually, I don't think that's ridiculous because based off what you just said, the principal should be 50, the senior designer should be at least 75. But if there's an admin that you just specified, this means the senior designer should be a higher amount and the admin should be lower. Does that make sense? So because the senior designer has an admin to do the non-billable work, it should allow the senior to be more billable, and the admin, because they're at a lower billable, obviously, they're not an experienced designer, they're not in the trade of interior design, they should be anywhere from 25 to 35. So if there's non-billable work to do, the senior designer should be like, I shouldn't be doing this, I should hand it to the admin. Because the senior designer, it's not that person above the work. That senior designer needs to be knowledgeable and like, I know I'm highly billable and I need to try to bill as much time as possible, and I can't be doing non-billable work. Okay.
And so then we're actually shooting for our senior designer to be 85 or 90% billable.
Exactly.
Okay.
If you have an admin in place. Now, some firms don't, which means the utilization will go down.
Okay. And then just as a technical question there, if you have a senior designer in place and no admin, do we bill out the senior when they're doing design level work at a certain hourly rate, and then we bill that senior out at a lesser rate when they are doing admin work? Or that's a skilled laborer that we've hired and that person makes that hourly rate for this firm no matter what they're doing?
That is also a good question. So I have two answers to that. First of all, you always need to refer to the contract that you have with that client. You can never bill, if you're billing hourly, you can never bill at just a made up rate. So you need to make sure you're following the guidelines, in that contract that has been agreed upon by you and your client. Second of all, if you have a senior designer and no admin, it's always important for those firms. When I come into those firms, I say, here's how to get more utilized. You have to hire someone to do the administrative work. And then we discuss, that's what leads me into cash flow, to be honest with you.
Right.
Then we see if we can hire someone at that point for a less utilized person. But if a firm just wants a senior designer and a principal, then obviously the senior designer will have to do some senior design work. But then according to the contract, if she also or he also does admin work, they need to bill their time at the admin rate. So
Okay.
I like that question because that's a very important concept to understand.
Right. I mean, I could see pushing back. I could see it from both sides. On one hand, I feel like if I'm the principal and I'm hired a senior designer with a level of skill, that designer is going to get a certain salary. And honestly, whether she or he is doing admin work or design work, I got to pay their salary. But I could also see pushback as a client saying, okay, when they're creating beautiful, amazing things for me, you can charge me $125 for that senior. But when they're, placing orders for furniture online, I think it should be $75 or $85. But not that not that I'm the advocate of the client sets what our rules are, by the way. But there's a lot of things that I'm very hard and fast on, like, so what? But that I could see both sides. So I was curious your opinion on it. Okay.
Yeah.
So now the other thing that I wanted to understand in there is that I get that we have to first take the time to do the religious tracking. And I imagine that your suggestion is to just start with how are you spending your time? Don't overthink it. Just track it for me for a week or 2 weeks and let me see what you're doing, your admin's doing, your senior's doing, yada, yada. But once you have that, and say you look at somebody and you've asked them to track their time, whether you require them to do it for 1 week or 1 month, whatever it might be, when you look at them and you find that the principle is you just find that the numbers are out of whack, the percentages, the utilization is out of whack based on what you said. How do you help and clarify for them the restructuring of that?
I love that question too. They're full of good questions. I actually had this situation just last month with another client. My principal was billing herself she was hitting her utilizations in the last couple months at like 67, 70%. Then I looked at her two like mid-level designers. They were not getting above 50. And I said to her, I sat her down and I said, this is the third month because we do this monthly. I reviewed the utilizations monthly with each client.
Can I ask you a question before you finish that? Because it's very important that I understand. When you said your principal was billing at 60 to 70%, did you mean of the 50% utilization as their goal, or she was billing or he was billing 60 to 70% of their hours?
Both. They were, well, first of all, I want them not to go above 50 because I really,
right, that's what I'm saying. Were they above 50 or they were only reaching 60% of 50? No,
they were above 50.
That's what I wanted to clear.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
And this particular designer is just a great person, and she's very productive herself. So a lot of things she can just do faster. And I said to her, I go, you're the name on the door. You also have a payroll you have to sustain. I need you to continually get the work in the door. But if your two designers, mid-level designers, are not hitting their utilizations, we set it 65 to 70% for them. They never got above 50 in the last 3 months. And I said, let's see what they're spending their time in. So here's what I did. I actually, because I'm in the Bay Area, I physically went into the office and I sat down with each staff designer. And I said, let's go over utilization again, because I've already trained them on what utilization is and how to track it on their own, because I really like each designer to understand what a utilization rate should be for their particular job and have them participate in that. And when I went through the timesheets for their month and they weren't hitting 50%, I was finding that things were getting miscoded. They didn't think that they decided on their end that it wasn't billable, which is a big no-no. You as a designer should not decide what is billable versus non-billable. If it is towards a project, if I go shopping or I go do a site visit, put it all under the job and mark it billable. It is up to the principal when they do the physical invoice to decide if they can bill it or not. But the idea behind tracking is not just to invoice, it's to track every last hour that you're spending because you have this project. And so we went through their timesheets and I educated and I sat with each of them for 30 minutes and I said, here's what's billable, here's not, here are the rules again. Because sometimes you have to continually, accounting and finance, it's not their trade. You have to drill it into them. So then I go into teacher mode and I say, here's how I need your time to go in. You have basic concepts down, but here's what it needs to look like. If you go run errands or you go do a vendor presentation, that's overhead. that's non-billable. You can classify that. But when it's to a project and you have to go shopping because of a client, you need to put it in as billable. And they are like, oh, okay. Because I went through their timesheets. I would say 25% of it was incorrectly marked. So that's a good example of when we're not hitting utilizations, why are we not hitting the utilization? Because then I say to the principal, I say, I understand. I had to have a talk with her as well. And I said, I understand it's easier for you, but your designers are not going to learn unless you teach them why you're so efficient.
Right.
Okay. So I want her to take the time to sit with her staff and mentor them and say, here's how I'm efficient. Here's why I bring in all the work, and teach them and guide them on that. And so that was last month. So once August closes, we'll do this again in mid-September and go, how did we do? And we'll look at it again and again. So we probably review utilizations for each of my clients should be 12 times a year.
Well, and the thing is, it is the important thing for the principal to understand, for us is as the owner of our business, to understand that if you continue to do the work that other people you are already paying and hired to do, you can't scale. The whole reason you hired them was to scale and to be able to handle more work and to create more profit. But if you don't teach and delegate and have them do it, you just have a lot of people looking at you while you're busy still, right? So let me ask you a question about, there was a distinction that you made in there. You said, don't decide if this is going to be billed to the client or not. It either is or isn't a billable activity. You record it as such, and the principal will then evaluate when the invoicing goes out. So does that mean that you have, at least for you and your clients, a working model of like columns, like, these are billable activities, these are not, and these are subject to your own firm? Or is it standardized in the industry? These are billable activities, these are not.
It actually, that's a loaded question, but depending on what state you're in, I track all activities pretty much the same way, unless it's in, let's say, for example, New York State, where all purchasing in time is taxable. So then we make sure those activities are taxable. In the state of California, only time is taxable, design time. So due to purchasing, according to the state law. So I set up my activities. I do have a basic list, but then I expand sometimes based off the state law and how it should be taxed. I also base it off of what my designers would like to see on their invoices. If some of them give really detailed invoices and they want their clients to see certain language. So it's really, I start with a basic list, but I expand. But I learned that list, believe it or not, doing architectural accounting. I felt that is the heart of revenue in architectural accounting is time tracking. So I got my ideas from being a controller with that architectural firm. So that's where it stems from, but it is a basic list, but I do expand it because it's one thing to throw a bunch of terms at a designer, but I really like to explain why something is the way it is, because I'm just like any old accountant out there. If I start using a bunch of accounting terminology, I really try not to do that. I like to translate it so that my principal understands accounting, but doesn't have to get a degree in accounting, if that makes sense.
It does, because if we don't understand it, it's hard to buy into it.
Yeah.
It just becomes one more weird thing that you numbers people do.
Well, and they run the other way when they hear, like, my main thing with my clients is if you get a tax letter from the federal, state, local, county government, do not ignore it. If you're afraid of it, scan it and send it to me and I'll translate.
Right.
I'm not a CPA. And to be honest, I never will be, because I need more activity in my accounting. I'm very, very outside the box when it comes to accounting. And I follow the GAAP accounting standards for those accountants that are listening to me, but I really try to explain it in a way that my designers, I understand these are the rules. Mm-hmm. And I try to explain what the federal, state, and local rules are so that they don't get into trouble, because one little mistake on a tax level will put a firm out of business. And I've seen it happen.
Right.
So it's very important to understand your regulations. If you don't communicate with your CPA or your enrolled agent, an enrolled agent is also someone that files taxes.
Right.
They're certified. if you don't have constant, like once or twice a year planning meetings with your CPA or enrolled agent, I will encourage you to do so, because open communication. And if the CPA, I've had certain CPAs come back and go, I can't continue with this account because it's beyond my scope. I've met CPAs that don't fully understand the revenue structure of an interior design business. So.
Right. It's tough. I mean, we had Peter Lang on recently. He's the designer CPA. He literally, that's his entire firm is geared and set up to just support and work with interior designers, because it is a different business model. It definitely is. You mentioned in there that when you talked about the different laws, the billable hours and the list and so forth, and it varies state to state, you said, for instance, in New York City, design fees and procurement are taxable, and in California, only design fees. Does that mean that if it's a taxable item, it automatically is or isn't a billable item?
So no, that's different. But let me just clarify on the state law in California. They tax purchasing time, not all design time. I just want to make that clarification in case someone's listening going, that's not true.
Okay.
It is a confusing aspect in California because there is a gray area in there, and the state board tries to clarify. I actually have a couple people I talk to over there. So I try to establish a good relationship with the state revenue departments as much as possible to help with that understanding. And then what was the second part of your question, Luann?
Well, I just wondered why you had that as part of the answer, because did it infer that something that's taxable is billable, or infer that something that's taxable is not billable? I wasn't sure what that meant.
Well, it just means that my list of activities that I set up to time track will be preset and then catered to that particular revenue structure in that state. Okay. That's kind of what I meant by that.
Oh, but okay. So it had nothing, I understood. So you're just saying, and for example, this is a different state from state to state. It's one of the things that's different. Understood. Okay. Now, take me back to this utilization model. You said that you had a presentation in DC recently where you walked people through it, designers through it. And I'm sure every designer went, walk us through it.
So what I did is, again, I just basically walked through. I had a flip chart and markers. I mean, I'm very old school when it comes to that stuff because PowerPoints are really boring. You got to respond to your audience. I'm very interactive with my audience. So I just don't blah, 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 Charlie Brown. I sit up there and I say, okay, how much do you guys want to get paid? How much would you love to get paid right now? And they shot out some salaries at me. And I said, okay, let's use $100,000. So let's figure out what we need to make in our business so that you can pay yourself $100,000 a year. And we start with $100,000. And then that's how we start the conversation. And then we build on that. And we say, here's what your time billings need to be able to pay your salary. And if they have a designer, we go through the designer and how much they want to pay the designer and go through how much revenue the designer brings in. So using the utilization, for example, if I have a billable for a designer at $200 an hour and they're 50% utilized, so I'm going to throw a bunch of numbers out right now.
Okay.
There's 2,080 hours in a year, workable hours. That's based off 52 weeks a year. Some people use 50, but I use 52. I'm old school. And then I go in and I say, out of 52 weeks a year, 2,080 hours, half of that should be billed to your client. What is that revenue? What's that number coming in? So you could take, and I'm going to pull up my little calculator here, and I'm going to say, okay, well, if I'm 200 a year,
200
if
an
I'm
hour.
200 an hour, and I'm just going to type this into my little Excel spreadsheet here, and I times it by 2,080, that's $416,000 a year. Now divide that in half because you're 50% of your year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you divide that by 2, just if I'm 50% utilized in 1 year and I bill 200 an hour, my potential revenue for me is $208,000 a year. And I guarantee you most designers are nowhere near that number at that rate.
Right.
And that's where I get them and their mouths drop. And I'm like, okay, so let's do your designer. Let's say they're 125 because I heard you say 125.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what their potential revenue is at a 75% utilization. So then I multiply 125 times 2,080 and I times it by 70.75. Their potential revenue is $195,000. That's so 2 people for 1 year for time design services only, not including purchasing revenue, is $403,000 just for 2 people in 1 year.
Okay. And just to be clear, from this comes every single expense, including all of the all of your operating expenses and blah, 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 right? I mean, or this is hourly billable. Where do we figure in, product and stuff like that goes on top of that. So that does not include the product that you sell to the client, but it does include your operating expenses, your car, your gas, electric, all of that stuff comes out of this.
That's where, remember, I discussed the multiplier.
Right.
So when you get a fully burdened rate and you use a multiplier, so when I learned about multipliers, I was in architectural accounting. A 3.5 is an average multiplier. So if I take a fully burdened rate for a designer and their rate is, let's say, $40 an hour, that's their fully burdened rate, I multiply that by 3.5. That is what I say is their suggested billable. If I do that, that's $140 an hour. That multiplier, why I'm focusing on that, is because it includes your overhead and your profitability. And that has been proven to be around, so multipliers can be anywhere from 3 to 4. And the reason we got that is because if it's 3, if you go lower on a multiplier, it means you're more experienced. So for a senior designer, I'd use a multiplier of 3. Does that make sense?
No, I'm waiting for it to make sense. It's not there yet.
This is where I start to lose my audience, and this is challenging to me because this means I'm not doing my job.
Well, okay, so just the thing is, let's see if we can pick it apart and see where you lost me. So I understand that the 403,000 combined, or even if we take the principal at 208, that's gross revenue. Okay, right. That's gross, and out of that comes our operating. And what you said is our burden rate. I understand that our burden rate is what you're saying is my taxes that I have to pay, my Social Security, my insurances, all of that. It's not my operating expenses. No. It's just my payroll expenses. And if I have a 401k and my matching and all of that, that's what that is, the burden rate?
Yes, you are absolutely correct on that.
Okay, so that we have clear. So what are you saying to me is if I'm a principal and I am billing myself out at $200 an hour, what am I multiplying by 3.5? That's where I'm lost.
So let's work backwards. Okay. So if you bill yourself at $200 and you want to know what your fully burdened rate is,
yes,
and you use a multiplier of 3.5, you will take that $200 and divide it by 3.5.
Okay.
And that's your cost of one employee. So if I take 200 and I divide it by 3.5, and just to clarify, 3.5 is an industry standard that I've used for years, and I try to poke holes in it. It comes anywhere between 3 to 5 is usually 3 to 4. I'm sorry, is a multiplier. So 3.5 is what expresses covering overhead and profitability. I want to make sure to say that because it's very important. You're not in this as a hobby. This is to make money. So that 3.5 represents how much your overhead is and your profitability.
And that comes out to $57.14.
Yes, an hour.
An hour. So what we're saying is 200 minus 57, 143 is going into paying the expenses and the operating, and 57 represents what you just said is our net profit on that.
And just so we clarify, if I'm paying a principal, well, not me, if the principal's paying themselves $57 an hour, that comes out to $118,000 salary. So see how we worked back into a potential salary there?
Yes.
That's what I explained to my group in DC, and that they had the same questions you did, Luann. It's not an easy concept, and it needs visuals.
Right.
So if anyone is literally lost right now after both of us discussing this, they're more than welcome to talk to me.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's complicated.
Yeah, it's not easy, but I have to go through it a number of times. And I'm just telling you now that I do this stuff repetitively every single day, which is why I know it. Okay. This is not something I learned in my master's in accounting. I didn't learn this concept. I learned this in the field, in working in construction, architectural, and design, through questions that people asked me and these models that I came up with. So I'm just saying, because of what I have experienced in the field, this is what I've learned. And I think it's important for everyone to know that just because they're designers doesn't mean they can't absorb this data.
Right.
So.
Well, and the thing that I want to really just re-say here is what all of that gobbledygook said, okay, don't mind my, is that if you are billing out at $200 an hour, you are actually earning $57 an hour, in a loose way of describing, like in your formula, which has been pretty well tried and true, between 3 and 4. So the point is that if you are billing out at $80 an hour, if I follow your same formula, I'm actually earning $22.86 per hour. Is that right?
And if you're billing out at $80 as a principal, we need to have a discussion.
Well, but that's why I brought that up, because this is the crux of the situation. I'm with you on this, Kim. I have never had a conversation with a principal who has said to me that I'm billing at $80 an hour and I don't need to know anything else about their business, and I say raise your rate. We can't even go to the next conversation because you already can't afford me, I have to tell you. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like you've got to raise your rate.
You just proved why my first 2 questions when I start with a new client is, do you track your time and are you reconciled?
Right.
That's the exact, because I can't do anything if you're not tracking your time.
Right.
I can't run through these formulas. I can't tell you how much to hire people at. I can't tell you the work you're coming down the pipeline. Like, I can't answer any of those questions unless you're tracking time.
Right. Well, and the thing to hammer home is that I understand as a designer, whether you have 2 years experience or 6 years experience, whatever it is, when you say the words to a potential client, I am billing at $80 an hour. Okay. I know there is a period of your experience level that you say to yourself, holy cow, how can I be billing at $80 an hour? I'm just a designer, or I'm only in business 2 years, or this and that. Or the other, what happens is I find, and you tell me if you find it, Kim, I find that as much as I'm talking about the $80 an hour price point, what I find is that you can really pretty much move someone to understand their value and go from 80 to about 115 without a lot of pushback. But I find it very hard to get them to get a designer to go from 115 to 175 to 200. That seems like a number that is harder for them to imagine. Now, you get to the point where you're dealing with somebody that's in business 8, 10, 15 years. Yes, you know what I mean? But we're talking about that moment of scaling up in experience, in that moment of coming into your own as a designer and as a business person. And the thing about it is that what I love about the way you describe this is if you're billing at 80 or 100 and 125, you are not getting that per hour. You are getting at $80 an hour, you're getting, not a lot more than the kid who's valeting at the country club between his tips and his thing. I mean, $22 an hour is not a rate for a professional person who spent, 4 years in school or doing whatever else they did. And it's also because it's a skill that is not enjoyed by everyone. It is actually a skill. So it's not that you just, even if you are not school taught, okay, because we both know that there are talented designers out there that have not gone about it through the traditional method. But
I have a couple of those clients, to be honest with you.
So, but the point is that if they haven't gone through it through 4 years of school, they've probably gone through it for 4 years of working for somebody else. I mean, you gain your experience one way or another. So to me, the criteria isn't the plaque on the door, on the wall, right? It's actually your body of knowledge and your experience. And so I think that this is an awesome way to express, because the thing is too, I guess what we have a hard time understanding is when you go from, I try and think about, like, in other words, if you're my employee and I'm going to pay you $45 an hour to work for me as a junior, right? I'm
Whoa,
paying
$45 an hour for a junior? That's great. I'll work for you.
Okay. Okay. But my point is that and whatever the number is, what I mean is when you are not the principal and you get paid your hourly is your reimbursement for the hours worked. But when you are the principal and you bill yourself out at an hour, that's not what you get paid for your hour, because you have to pay all of your expenses out of that hour, quote unquote, amount too. You see what I'm trying to say?
I do.
And I feel like that's the transition from being an employee to a business owner. So a principal may pay their junior $25 an hour, but bill them out at $85 because they have to do all those other things that come out of the business that the junior is just walking away with their hourly rate. Right?
And that's just what I said at the beginning. Well, they're not just a designer. They're now an entrepreneur and running a business and responsible for a lot more than they probably thought.
Right.
Which is why they hire me, to be honest, to help them with this kind of thing and make it efficient, so that they're not spending a lot of time on should I hire? How much am I going to make? What's my budget?
Now, the other part of this that's difficult, because this is one nut to crack, and for us to have our designer colleagues to have their breakthrough moment, their aha moment on this, like, whoa, $200 an hour, I'm actually making 57. And that's the thing. So and I just want to repeat that one more time. So what you were saying is, in your presentation in DC, is if you are going to work 2,080 hours this year, 52 weeks of the year, if you are billing at 200 and you're coming in, your salary is coming in. No, I just got myself down a thing because we're only billing at 50% of those hours,
so
right? Yes, clear me up.
208 so you're on the right track, and again, this is why we go over this a lot.
Right,
it's half of 200 an hour, so it's really 208,000 a year is 50% utilization on that rate. Right.
Yeah. Okay, right. And then further, the designer's net income comes down to that $118,000 amount.
Yes.
Right. That's it. Okay, that's it. I love that. Okay, so so that's one nut to crack, and that's one concept to really, as you say, I can see it. It could take 2, 3, 5, 6 times to really own it and think it and believe it and grasp it and be able to work in it fluidly, okay? But the other side of that, and I don't know that we have time to talk about this today, and maybe you'll need to come back another time, but the other side of that is understanding when you're sitting there and you have 2 or 3 projects in the pipeline and you're feeling like, well, this is the 5th or 6th or 7th month in a row that I've had, 3 or 4 projects and I've needed a junior or another designer in my firm. But how do I know if it's going to keep happening? And I get afraid that the second I decide to go and hire that person, what if something dries up? And so that's where you help people talk about, projection of cash flow, not just analyzing the revenue that they have, but you have a way of teaching designers to create cash flow projections and to understand that and to be able to forecast, right?
Correct. And you are absolutely right. I think I could talk for hours about time tracking and cash flow projections, but that's another tool that I use. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It's just called a cash flow projection. I project out 6 months. I use the current projects that they have, and I ask them difficult questions, and they start to get flustered and realize how much they don't know about their projects. Sometimes when I do ask these questions, I say, well, when does this client want the job done? How much is in their budget? And based off those answers, we create a cash flow projection for 6 months. And then I add in projected costs at the bottom of that, and you can clearly see where, if it starts to go into the negative by a lot, where they will start to need to get another 2, 3, 4 jobs to maintain their current staff. But then also, if the revenue is on the other side, if they're making a lot of net income after I make this calculation, it's a sign they probably need to hire. If they have 4 or 5 jobs, they're like, do I have enough staff? The cash flow helps me help them determine, okay, you're going to need staffing. You've got too many jobs and too little staff, or you don't have enough jobs to maintain your staff. So it's on both spectrums, which I think is enlightening, because they're all about getting jobs, but then they don't know how to understand their staff levels based off how many jobs they have. And that's what the cash flow does.
And so one of the things that you do is you look at the present situation and you say, okay, you've got 4 projects going on now. And one of the first things that you're expressing is you say, okay, client Smith, is this project going to go on for 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 more years? And then let's talk about how many hours and what budget you have per month allotted, with this client. What's the agreement? And then client Jones, is this project going to go on for 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years? And then that's how you sort of put a guesstimate, because maybe client Smith is on board with 40 billable hours a month and you expect this project to go 6 more months. So you're saying theoretically nothing goes wrong. This client is going to net you, or is going to earn you this gross revenue in product, mix of product, billable hours, and design fees. Am I on the right track?
You're absolutely on the right track. And that's also what we review monthly. So we look at their projected list. Once again, August closes this weekend. So once we'll do next week is start looking at what money came in for August based off what you thought was coming in. And then we project out. Right now we project out through February, which is scary even to say out loud.
Right.
We said there we add another month, which is February, and we project again. We look at our projections again. This process sounds like a lot, but once you get it set up, it's about 15 minutes to a half an hour of review each month. And you'd be surprised how many of them love this process. It looks scary to begin with when I start going through my spreadsheet and I ask all my questions. But once we get the data in, they start to see the patterns. It's a lot about pattern. And I just worked with one client here in San Francisco, and he sat down, he just raised, he's like, I had all this data in my head, Kim, but I didn't know it could result in this. And and he goes, this is helping me beyond ways I even imagined, because now I can take this data and fully understand where my business is going and what my potential, if I need another job, or if I need to tell someone I can't take another job until October. And he says, I've never had a tool like this. And I did know the answers to your questions, but I didn't know I could be organized like this to help me in such a way. So these designers know their jobs. They just don't know how to understand them financially sometimes.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
And this tool, I'm sure, also this process of doing this monthly, the first thing that comes to my mind that's obvious, I'm sure to everybody listening as well, is when you take this assessment every single month of how many weeks or months are left on this project, then it's time to rainmake now. You've got 3 clients that are going to come to close, so you're going to evaluate from August to February. You've got 4 clients in-house, and 2 are going to close between November and February. So we need to get somebody in the pipeline for that new year. So that means we start now. However we do it, by networking or by talking to clients about referrals or things like that. But if you're looking and you've got 6 projects in the pipeline and they're all going to be a minimum of 5 months and longer, we're not necessarily looking for new clients right now. We're saying we're at capacity, we're good. Let's tell people okay, we're going to put you on the hold list. We'll come back to you, because we also know that we don't want to overextend and underdeliver and create bad name for ourselves.
On that topic, I have one more thing to add, but if they get additional projects, and they might need to staff up.
Right, they can take it if they, right.
Yeah, so if they start to get too many jobs and they're like, I don't want to turn them away, we know at least in advance, 3 to 4 months in advance, that now I need to start looking for somebody. Right,
that's your option as the principal to make that decision.
So it's on that level too, and when you have too much work and you don't want to turn projects down, because I know there's designers out there get these homes and they're already full capacity, but they're like, oh my God, this home is beautiful. I want to photograph it when it's done.
That opportunity.
And I say, okay, so let's go back to the payroll calculator and take a look and see what we can afford. And then that's how I use them interchangeably. So it's interesting, because I think none of this, again, is taught in accounting. It's all based off job site experience. I actually learned it doing self-performed concrete tracking for Swinerton in the field at the early age of my late 20s with a hard hat on. You wouldn't believe the comments I got from some of the guys on the job site. But hey, what are you going to do?
That's it.
Yeah,
Well, I think
learned
it's
in the rough and tough area. So, yeah.
No, I mean, it is a very, it is a particular unique business model, interior design. And it's challenging one. And the biggest thing that I find, and you've said it a couple of times, is one of the biggest handicaps that we can straddle ourselves with or strap on to ourselves is simply just looking the other way because it seems overwhelming or intimidating. And
scary is the number one word I get.
That's it. That's it.
Keeping me up at night. I get that a lot too.
Right.
Kim, I can't sleep. I don't know how much more work I need. I'm like,
right.
Let's help you get some sleep.
Right. And so that's the thing for me is that there is a paradox in there that I often will speak to my clients about that when I coach them is if it's keeping you up at night and you go week after week without wrestling with it and understanding it, what are we doing here? This is like Einstein's, definition of insanity. We keep doing the same thing every day and expect a different result. So I get that it's scary, but what is the point of not sleeping at night? If we just tackle this and we figure this out, then guess what? We actually make money and we get sleep. So, but I understand it. I have compassion for it. You don't know this necessarily, but my loyal listeners know that my husband runs this function in our business and I've learned many, many more things of it, but I'm 36 years in business, you see? Yeah. And so I've had that benefit of being there. And this is the number one thing that people will say to me, I don't have a VIN man in my business. So where do I get this? And this sounds like this is where you come in very nicely, Kimberly. It's a nice function that you serve here. And you do work with designers. You have many, many designer accounts, and you do work with designers in all states. So it's not like you do it virtual. You don't have to be in San Francisco.
No, and actually, for the listeners, I am moving to Washington, D.C. in November.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Sounds good. I mean, I think it's awesome. Thank you so much for
sharing.
For having me. Yes, no, I appreciate it. It was a great discussion. I learned something. I'm sure our friends out there did as well. I appreciate your time today, Kim.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So if you do not have a handle on your money, if you do not know how much money you made last year, if you don't know how much money you made on your last project, listen up. You have homework to do. For real, you have homework. Start by tracking your hours for 1 month, just like Kim suggests. It's something that is very important for you to do. It's the baseline of really understanding your business. So track your hours for 1 month like it's your religion. Do it. Do it for yourself. Do it for your future self. Do it because your interior design business is a business. It's not a hobby. Next, do the exercise of figuring out your actual net hourly income. Remember, Kim said take your hourly rate, divide it by 3.5. This number that's there is the number, that's the dollar amount that you get to keep from you, from the hourly rate that you charge. So if you charge $125 an hour, now you know that you are actually taking home for yourself $36 an hour. Now say that number to yourself. Does it feel right? Does it feel fair? This is not a trick question. For some, when you do this calculation, the number that you look at will feel right. Maybe for where you are in your career and your level of expertise and your experience, you'll say, hey, that's great. I'm good with that. Or will you be the one who is surprised by that number and thinks, what? I've been doing this for this many years. I deserve more than that. You see, there is truly no right or wrong here. No one else gets an opinion on this but you. It's what's right for you. And why is that? Well, it's like I tell all my mastermind designers and all my one-on-one clients, you will earn what you believe you are worth. You decide the amount. This is the truth of it. And if you question me and you think that I'm just making this up, think about it logically. I'll bet there are at least 10 designers in a 25-mile radius of you. Now, for many areas, that's going to be an extremely conservative number. Many of you have 20, 30, 40, 50 designers, right? But let's just say, as a blanket, let's check the theory out, that there are 10 designers that are doing business in a 25-mile radius of you. You know that this is a conservative number. Okay, so if we call all 10 interior designers, who wants to bet me that the hourly range goes from $50 an hour all the way to at least $250 an hour, right? I'm right. I mean, I know I'm right, right? So the only question then is, where are you in that range? Because it exists. Your market proves it will bear it. You see, raising your rates has nothing to do with will the clients in my area pay this amount? Someone, I promise you, is already charging the rate that you're worried about raising your rate to. Okay? So, and what is it? It comes down to, can you say that rate? Can you own that rate? Are you convinced that you are worth that rate? Okay? Because the other thing that I tell my coaching clients is, you ultimately always will decide what you will and you won't do. And if you set out making these decisions before you are taking that prospective client phone call, before you are going to that consultation, if you work it out for yourself, for example, that I work for $145 an hour and I won't work for $95 an hour, then anyone who won't pay $145 an hour is not your client. You say no. You don't lower your rate. And do you know why? Because there is someone right behind them that will pay it. And there is another designer that's charging the $95 that they can go find. I know this to be true. There are not many things that I will stand here on this show and be specifically finite about. But charging what you're worth, this is in your head. It is not a matter of what the market says or does. Make no mistake about this. I promise you, it is in your head because somebody is sitting next to you charging the rate that you wish you could charge. Now, I always say you have to have the goods to go with it. You have to have the experience and expertise for each level that you are. But when you do this calculation, if you feel that you are being underpaid, raise your rates. All right. Now, go do your homework, track your hours, figure out your hourly rate, and then project your earnings for the 6 months and tell me if you need to raise your rates in order to reach your financial goals, okay? And I'm just going to say to you, if you are struggling with this mindset at all, or even the logistics of how to evaluate your projects, your business, to determine if your rates are in line or if they're going to help you meet your financial goals or not, seriously, think about joining me at Power Talk Friday Tour in High Point Market, Saturday, October 13th, 2018, because this is exactly what we're going to talk about. Bring your tracking of your hours for the next 3 weeks between now and then. If you have employees, bring their hours too, and then you will have the chance to sit down individually with me, Michelle Williams, Stacy Brown Randall, Claire Jefford, and my husband Vin, and have your specific questions about your business answered. This is not theory. This is not on, pie in the sky numbers or examples of somebody else's business. This is your numbers, your business. This is a chance to get a real handle on where you are, where you're going, and leave with a plan to reset the course so that you can reach your goals, not just dream about them. Okay? You know that Michelle Williams and my husband are the numbers people. Stacy will help you put an action plan in place for building your pipeline. Claire will help you set your projects up from the beginning so that they succeed with systems and processes for onboarding clients and for managing the projects. Okay? As you know, this transformative day is sponsored by Bijou Wall Coverings, whose product offerings include, but are certainly not limited to, decorative textiles, natural textile wall coverings, handcrafted wood veneer wall coverings, and custom prints. Okay? Visit them at bijoucoverings.com, BIJOU coverings.com. It's also sponsored by Revel Woods. All Revel Woods products are handcrafted and custom curated, sourced and produced completely in North America, sustainably harvested and ethically manufactured. With a little attention to detail, luxury and responsibility can be happily coexisting. And then last of not least, by My Doma Studio, your source for organizing all of your client projects in one place. Easy to manage, saving you time and increasing your efficiency. All right? So go do your homework. Get real about your numbers and make the commitment to yourself to run a profitable interior design business. And like I said, if you're really looking to get serious and make a big leap, join me in High Point Market, okay? For information, go to luannniagara.com, go to the events tab, and then click on coaching. You'll actually see the tab for Power Talk Friday Tour right there, okay? And you know, I always ask you, what will you decide to do today to be excellent? At the very least, do the homework. Decide to do the homework, all right? Thank you so much for joining me today. Decide to be excellent. Thank you so much for joining me again today. This podcast is a production of WindowWorks, your resource for custom window treatments and awnings. To learn how we can help you on your next interior design project, go to www.windowworks-nj.com. And if you're interested in working with me on your business, either through masterminds or one-on-one coaching, or you want to know how to get my book, The Making of a Well-Designed Business, or you just want to know what's going on in the podcast land and where I'm going to be, all of that is found at luannniagara.com. Thank you so much. Have an excellent day.